body of the missing woman was discovered in the woods near the town, shocking the entire area. As police immediately sealed off the scene and directed their suspicions towards the husband, he remained in the house, strangely calm, offering no denial or sign of panic. This composure only intensified suspicion. When the girl returned home, she discovered her mother was missing. She called, but her mother didn't answer, and her keys were left by the door. However, while she searched the house, her father stared helplessly and regretfully at a photograph of his wife. He reached out, but then deliberately avoided the picture frame and picked up a book nearby. A short while later, Alana went to his study and asked where her mother was. On the second day after Michael's wife, Sarah, disappeared, he returned to school fully dressed. As the headmaster of a prestigious high school, he stood on the podium, announcing that his football team had won the game decisively. After the meeting ended, his daughter Alana anxiously signaled on the phone that there was still no news of Sarah, but he merely glanced at her coldly and turned to leave. It wasn't until the afternoon, after finishing all his work, that he went to the police station to report the disappearance. When Officer Annie asked about the last time he saw Sarah, he calmly replied that both his wife and daughter were teachers at the school. Yesterday morning, at 10:20 during the break, he and his wife had met once. At noon, from 12:15 to 12:30, the three of them had lunch together. In the afternoon, he and his daughter went to watch a football game. After driving home, he couldn't contact his wife anymore. She had never before left without saying a word. This was extremely strange. However, Annie felt something was amiss. Why didn't he report her disappearance to the police immediately, but instead waited until the next day? According to protocol, the police should question everyone involved. Before Annie arrived at the mansion where Michael lived, Alana had found the diary Sarah had hidden. After reading its contents, she seemed somewhat panicked. She tore out a few pages and secretly tucked them into a book. The mansion was only a street away from the school. Annie asked the staff for the exact location. Upon arrival, the first thing they did was separate the two women for questioning. Faced with Annie's questions, Michael calmly answered each one. When asked if there was any rift in their relationship, his expression changed, and he replied that nothing was wrong. Annie continued to ask why he seemed so calm. He explained that he had 160 students under his supervision who were about to take their final exams. This was closely related to their life paths, so he believed that only by remaining calm and keeping Sarah's disappearance a secret could he avoid causing panic and anxiety among the students. Meanwhile, in another room, Alana told Annie's partner, Becky, that everything in the house was decided by Michael. Sarah's life had always revolved around him. In the eyes of outsiders, she had virtually no autonomy. After obtaining Alana's permission, the police entered the master bedroom to search and unexpectedly found Sarah's phone under the bed. But Michael insisted that he didn't know the password to unlock the phone. Even Alana, who considered herself to know her mother best, recited several combinations of numbers, but the result was always an incorrect password error. Therefore, the police had no choice but to take the phone and other evidence back to the station to hand it over to the technical department for unlocking. The following day, Michael was forced to heed the police's advice and announce the disappearance to the school's teachers. Afterward, he nonchalantly went on to interview job applicants as if the disappearance were a minor matter. That evening, the case finally made progress. The police received a notification from the technical department that at 12:42 p.m. March 23rd, the day Sarah disappeared, her phone had been switched off. However, at 3:02 p.m., a bank card transaction history appeared. The police quickly informed Michael's family the following morning. The transaction had occurred at a vending machine in a neighboring town, but Sarah never smoked, and she had no reason to go to the neighboring town. This meant it was possible someone else had used her card. Therefore, the police announced they had specifically dispatched officers to investigate. But the vending machine was in a blind spot of the surveillance camera, so nothing was recorded. The case therefore stalled. To gather more clues related to Sarah, Michael agreed to let the police hold a press conference to announce the information. After that, he still insisted on returning to school to coach the football team he had personally trained, but he persuaded the vice principal to calm down the other teachers, trying to limit the gossip among the students. On the fourth day since Sarah disappeared, Annie and Becky visited the mansion again. This time, a neighbor rushed up to them. It turned out that the neighbor had just discovered a cold body while walking his dog in the woods. The neighbor had known Michael's family for many years, so he recognized it at a glance as Sarah. Michael looked out the window and saw Annie running towards him. He went downstairs, opened the door, and sat quietly in a chair, checking his watch as if he had anticipated when this scene would unfold. Before Annie could speak, he interrupted her, saying that whatever they found had to be kept secret from the school. The police, having received the notification, immediately arrived and cordoned off the scene. The autopsy could only be conducted after the body was taken to the forensic lab. Currently, there were no further clues clues, but numerous suspicious points suggested a murder, a highly probable cause of death. Later, Becky approached Annie to report that she had successfully cracked Sarah's phone password. The call history showed that Sarah rarely contacted Michael, but she frequently called someone named Claire. Their calls often lasted for hours. If they could find Claire and investigate what Sarah had said before her death, they might find the key to solving the case. Annie used her phone to call Claire's number, but the cold voicemail message on the other end read, "Hello, this is Detective Sergeant Annie Cassidy. Please call me back as soon as you receive this message." Michael was only worried about whether the parents of the students passing by would become suspicious. Facing his daughter's anxiety, he kept repeating that the police had only found one body and couldn't yet confirm it was Sarah. This heartless attitude of his made his daughter's heart sink. During dinner, when Alana questioned the two police officers about the case, Michael slammed the table, forbade her from speaking, and left. Annie felt extremely uneasy about his seemingly indifferent attitude. She even clearly showed her disgust towards him. After returning home, she searched for information about Michael's family online. Both the images and the words suggest a family overflowing with love and warmth, but Michael's behavior over the past few days has long cast a cloud of suspicion over this seemingly perfect family facade. The forensic team released the autopsy results after 24 hours. Although they couldn't provide the exact time of death based on the skin color and the marks on the neck, they concluded that Sarah's death was due to strangulation. Her mother's sudden death plunged Alana, who had been persistently searching for her, into deep grief. On work days, she couldn't concentrate on her classes. She canceled her lessons and hid at home, weeping. The police concealed the true cause of Sarah's death from her, only stating that, according to procedure, the next step was to identify the body. But at this crucial moment, Michael, the head of the family, was unexpectedly absent. He was giving a speech at the school. For him, the title of principal seemed far more important than his roles as husband and father. Because the police waited at his house for a long time without him returning, they had to go to the teacher's office at the school to search. However, just before the police arrived, Michael finished his speech and left. Under police instructions, the assistant called Michael several times, but all calls went to voicemail. Annie couldn't help but wonder if Michael's sudden departure at this very moment, given Sarah's murder, showed he was afraid. Regarding this matter, a representative from the school's board of trustees stated they would consider suspending Michael. Although the vice principal felt indignant on Michael's behalf, the representative insisted that this was done out of consideration for the school's reputation. The vice principal had to give up on defending Michael. No one could have imagined that at this very moment, Michael was leisurely strolling through a supermarket. His sofa at home was dirty, so he spent over 10 minutes choosing a suitable bottle of cleaning solution. While paying, the phone rang, but he remained indifferent, completely ignoring it. Only when the cashier reminded him did he reluctantly answer. Faced with Annie's questioning on the other end of the line, he lied, saying the phone was always on silent mode. Annie returned to the villa, where Sarah's parents had also heard the news, and rushed over. They repeatedly confirmed whether the body was indeed their daughter. The police explained that although no one had yet come to identify the body, based on the autopsy results and neighbor testimonies, it was definitely Sarah, without a doubt. They then inquired about the cause of Sarah's death. According to regulations, before the case progresses and is publicly announced, the police are not allowed to disclose details to anyone, but witnessing the two elderly parents grieving the loss of their child right before her eyes, Annie held back the tears welling up in her eyes, trying her best to remain calm. Time and again, they begged her to tell the truth. She felt heartbroken and worried, so she broke her usual routine. The truth is often difficult to accept. At a time when family members needed companionship the most, Michael still hadn't come home. Annie and Alana had to go to the school to find him. He was on the football field supervising students preparing for a football game, but this absolutely shouldn't be happening when the police needed him to identify the body. Alana, losing patience with Michael, threatened him, saying that if he didn't go, she would have to go herself. Seeing no way to avoid it, he reluctantly agreed. The two of them went to the morgue with Annie. Michael requested that the identification be carried out solely by him because he did not want his daughter's last memory of her mother to be of a cold corpse. Meanwhile, Annie was also paying close attention to his every gesture and action. She wanted to know whether, upon seeing his wife, he would naturally express his grief or hide it with guilt. But the result was utterly disappointing. He only took 10 seconds to leave the room to view the body. There was no sorrow or guilt, only the same coldness as always. He officially confirmed the body as Sarah. The police immediately upgraded the case to a full-scale homicide investigation. Michael was cheering on the football team members. Perhaps knowing he was about to face responsibility from the board of directors, he finally relinquished control of the team to the physical education teacher. Then, his lonely figure disappeared into a corner of the school. He shed all his pretense, clung to the wall, and sobbed uncontrollably. Annie followed him and was stunned by what she saw. It turned out that Michael, who seemed so strong and cold, also had a vulnerable side. Just as she was about to comfort him, he pushed her hand away, straightened his back, and seemingly calm yet unsteady, walked forward. Meanwhile, Becky, upon entering the villa, stepped on the soaking wet carpet. Only then did she realize it had been cleaned. She mentioned that Michael seemed very particular about such things. Alana denied this, honestly stating that Sarah was actually the one who was strict. Sarah didn't like anyone walking on the carpet with their shoes. Thinking back, it seemed that many times Michael was the one having to adapt to her demands. At this moment, Michael was taken to the police station for questioning. The police chief got straight to the point, asking if he was the real murderer of Sarah. This question caused a brief silence in the interrogation room. Just then, Annie's phone rang. The incoming call screen showed it was from Claire, the person she was looking for. But when she answered the phone, the voice on the other end was a man's. Annie traced the number to Claire's place. Only then did she learn that the man's real name was Stephen. His son was Dylan, the star player on the school's football team. Stephen told Annie that Sarah had saved his number under Claire's name because she was afraid Claire would discover their relationship. During the conversation, he denied having an affair with Sarah. But they did have feelings for each other. They were just restraining themselves to maintain their marriage and family. He repeatedly hinted that Sarah and Michael had long since lost feelings for each other, and only he truly cared about Sarah. But Annie cut short his charade. She asked why he hadn't called Sarah after she disappeared. This completely contradicted the concern he had just claimed. Stephen recounted his alibi once again, proving that all his activities that day took place at school. Whether he was teaching a class or watching a football game, there were traces left behind. Annie couldn't find any inconsistencies, so she had to temporarily release him. She returned to the police station and recounted all the clues she had gathered. Stephen's deliberate or unintentional shifting of suspicion towards Michael was already very strange. Furthermore, Annie told the police chief that when investigating the football game on March 23rd, Stephen's son, as a key player, had also played. But on such an important day, Stephen was absent. Sarah had disappeared that same day, so there was only one possibility. The two of them had secretly met. So, Annie understood everything, because that day Sarah had decided to meet Stephen. But since tracking her phone might reveal her location, she had deliberately hidden it under the bed. If they had concealed it so well, the relationship between Stephen and Sarah couldn't possibly be as he claimed. Indeed, when the police reviewed the school's old surveillance footage, they discovered that in every instance, Sarah and Stephen's gazes towards each other were intensely passionate. This further fueled Annie's suspicions. So, on March 23rd, the police officially initiated the process of bringing Stephen to the station for questioning about his alibi. He claimed he owned a vacation home in a nearby town. Since he usually rented it out to strangers, he had gone there that day to check its cleanliness. He didn't return until late evening. The police immediately dispatched a team to search the vacation home. Furthermore, the police chief noticed that the section between Stephen and Sarah in his phone was completely blank. It was highly likely he had deleted the messages himself, which undoubtedly contained clues detrimental to him. The technicians quickly cracked the code and recovered the messages. Nearly 700 ambiguous conversations were read aloud by the police chief, word for word, right in front of Stephen. But in the last message before Sarah disappeared, the ambiguity suddenly turned into a threat. This was because Sarah had sent a message wanting to end things, and Stephen had completely changed, responding with a terrible tone. The detective involved in the interrogation continued to pressure him. Sarah's bank card had a transaction history at a vending machine in the neighboring town, a machine only a 5-minute drive from Stephen's cabin. So, would he continue to deny it or confess? There was no hiding it anymore. Stephen had to admit to his relationship with Sarah, and he revealed that Sarah had accidentally left her bank card in his car during a date. On March 23rd, he returned to the cabin but forgot his wallet, so he used her card to pay, unknowingly leaving a clue for the police. The relationship between Alana and her physical education teacher, Paul, was far from normal. Although not publicly acknowledged, they had been in love for a long time. She asked Paul, the PE teacher, to retrieve a book from her locker, which contained several pages she had torn from her mother's diary. She told Paul that if the police read the contents, they would likely list Michael as their prime suspect, so she had to hide the clue carefully. But she felt uneasy leaving it at school, so she secretly took it home, intending to burn it. However, Michael discovered her sneaky actions and forced her to take out the diary pages and read them aloud in front of him. In her diary, Sarah recorded her intention to run away, a plan she had been making for months. She also wrote that she had long been unable to tolerate the little things about being with Michael, and instead cherished her time with Stephen even more. The diary entries were scathing and undisguised criticisms of Michael. But whenever she wrote about Stephen, Sarah's words became infatuated and longing. For a man's pride, this was undoubtedly a devastating blow. Alana ultimately threw the diary into the incinerator. At the same time, the neighbor discovered the body and told Becky that the time and place he went for his daily dog walk had never changed, 4:30 p.m. to the woods behind the mansion. On the day Sarah disappeared, when he passed through the woods, he didn't see any body. It was only later that the dog smelled the corpse in the woods. This means that Sarah wasn't there initially, but her body was moved to the forest after she was murdered. Becky relayed the report to Annie. If Stephen was the murderer, he would surely have found a way to dispose of the body. Annie immediately reviewed the surveillance camera footage near his house. The images clearly showed that on the evening of March 23rd, after parking his car at home, he didn't leave again. But surprisingly, at 11:15 that night, a car was parked in front of Stephen's house for a long time, and the person who got out was Michael. The fact that he could find Stephen's house could only prove that he had known about the illicit relationship between the two for some time. Could this have fueled his intention to kill Sarah? The following morning, the vice principal and a representative of the board of trustees officially announced Michael's suspension from his duties. The police also visited the mansion again, summoning Michael to the station for questioning, but the lawyer he hired stated his legal rights, that he had the right to remain silent in the face of any questions. Furthermore, the video couldn't be considered concrete evidence of murder, so the police couldn't extract any information from him. He was once again released without charge. Michael had long been wary during interrogations, but through his interactions with Annie, he occasionally uttered a few words. So Annie secretly turned on the recording software on her phone, trying to subtly extract information from him. Under her skillful guidance, he finally dropped his guard and confessed that he had known Sarah was seeing someone else. Therefore, after Sarah disappeared, Michael thought she was going on another date with Stephen, which is why he secretly drove to Stephen's house. After confessing, he felt a rare sense of relief. He said that even so, he didn't dare confront Sarah directly, because doing so would lead to the destruction of his family and the loss of his reputation. Therefore, he chose a more twisted form of revenge. He vented all his hatred on Stephen's son, Dylan. Dylan was excellent on the football field, yet Michael couldn't help but mock and insult him. He even demoted him from a key player to a reserve and ordered him to pack equipment and pour water for the other players. The next day, the police held a press conference announcing the progress of the case. Although Stephen had been taken to the station, he was released because no concrete evidence could be found to convict him of murder. When Michael learned about this on television, he was so angry that he clenched his fists. When Annie visited, he immediately questioned her about whether Stephen had denied the accusations. This question instantly heightened Annie's vigilance. Details about Sarah's death were completely confidential, so where did Michael get that information? He helplessly covered his face with his hands and let out a heavy sigh. Once he regained his composure, he began repeating his story about his failed marriage. But this time, Annie's gaze was filled with suspicion. He had to explain that when he went to the morgue to identify the body, he had asked about the marks on Sarah's neck. The forensic doctor, unable to hide the truth, told him that Sarah had been strangled to death. Back at the police station, Annie recounted all the conversations from the past few days. The police chief ordered the officers to re-examine Michael's alibi. The first person questioned was Alana. Since burning the diary, she had moved to live with her grandfather. Paul occasionally visited her. When she testified that from March 23rd until the discovery of the body, she had spent every evening at home with Michael, he immediately interrupted and denied her statement. He told Becky that she would occasionally go for walks with him to clear her head. Therefore, no one could be sure whether Michael had left the house during that time, and he was still suspected of disposing of the body. Furthermore, before coming here, Paul had confirmed to the vice principal that they had witnessed Michael physically assaulting players on numerous occasions. This was enough to prove his violent tendencies, and it was entirely plausible to suspect that he had similarly abused Sarah. The answer was likely hidden in his seemingly innocent words. Annie continued her psychological attack, trying to extract information from Michael. This time, she mentioned her own failed marriage. It turned out that she had recently divorced her extremely controlling and abusive ex-husband, but he repeatedly assured her that he would change, clinging to her like a sticky plaster. She was handling a missing person case that had remained unsolved for 8 years. Her ex-husband, using his higher position as an excuse to help her extract documents, frequently asked her out. At the same time, she feared that making a big fuss would jeopardize her position at the police station. Therefore, she hesitated, just like Michael had with Sarah, unable to definitively end the relationship, yet unable to truly expose his true nature. Annie openly shared her failed marriage experiences, leading Michael to believe she could empathize sympathize with him. Seeing a flicker of emotion in his eyes, a car suddenly stopped in front of the door and honked loudly. It was her ex-husband. Unable to contact Annie, he had come to her door to help her leave. She felt her blood run cold. She pretended to search for her phone while racking her brain for an excuse to decline. It was in his jacket pocket, recording their conversation. The car horns blared louder and louder. Her hot-tempered ex-husband couldn't wait any longer. As soon as Annie stepped out the door, he grabbed her arm and dragged her into the car. He said he wanted to talk about their relationship immediately, completely disregarding whether she was working or not. Michael stepped out to help. Faced with Annie's ex-husband's threats, he showed no fear. Annie's ex-husband, using his police status, intimidated him into the room and even shoved him. Michael, for assaulting a police officer, was subdued and pinned to the ground. But Annie's ex-husband only wanted to assert his authority. Alana, who had just arrived, witnessed this firsthand and mistakenly believed that the police were targeting her father because he was actually involved in her mother's murder. Because Annie had previously interfered with her work during a body identification mission, her superiors had temporarily ordered her to refrain from any involvement related to Michael. First, she had to go to the evidence room to register each piece of evidence from Sarah's case. In the evidence bag, she discovered a key of unknown origin. She recalled reading about a series of assaults a few days earlier while reviewing files. The commonality between the two victims and Sarah was the strangulation marks on their necks. She learned from a colleague that the perpetrator had moved to Spain shortly after his release from prison and had never returned. Before moving, he had lived with his cousin for a long time, who had previously been suspected of being an accomplice. Determined not to overlook any clue, Annie secretly found the cousin's address, hoping to see if the key could unlock their house. The result, of course, was disappointing. Moreover, she was caught red-handed by the landlord's son. She identified herself as a police officer and learned that the person she was looking for had died last Christmas, so that person couldn't possibly be the murderer she was searching for. Slightly annoyed, she returned to her car, staring at the key, unable to figure out where it came from or why it was next to Sarah's body. That evening, when she arrived home, she had arranged to meet her ex-husband, but because she opened the door 2 minutes late, he, as usual, berated her like an idiot. She was stunned by the shouting, and her ex-husband didn't hesitate to bang on the door even harder. Looking at the surveillance camera, she saw her ex-husband heading down a different street and suddenly remembered she hadn't locked the back door. Without hesitation, she ran to the door and unlocked it faster than her ex-husband. Seeing her fierce resistance, her ex-husband finally gave up pretending. Only after her ex-husband left did she breathe a sigh of relief. This experience also helped her understand that a person's nature is unchangeable, and if she continued like this, she would only sink deeper into the abyss. The next day, Alana proactively suggested talking to Michael. She went straight to the point, asking him if he was the one who had murdered her mother. He remained silent, not knowing how to respond. Perhaps the unfounded suspicion of his loved ones had completely shattered his heart, and he no longer wanted to explain further. But Alana misunderstood this silence as tacit admission, and she turned around and went straight to the police station to give her statement. She said that she had known for a long time that her parents' marriage was falling apart, and that while tearing up those diary pages, she suddenly realized she had overlooked a message her mother had left behind, that her mother was very afraid of her father. She always wondered, why should a husband and wife be so afraid of each other? Could it be that her father had also been violent towards her mother, even threatening her mother's life? Therefore, she concluded that her mother's death was undeniably linked to her father. But no one expected that Alana's distrust would be the final straw, breaking Michael. He had no more attachment to this world. He went deep into the forest, throwing a knotted rope onto a tree branch. After receiving the news, Annie, defying the ban, immediately rushed to the scene. Fortunately, Michael was rescued in time and taken to the hospital, escaping critical condition. Looking up at the terrifying knot hanging from the branch, Annie felt an indescribable sorrow. From what she had observed of Michael over the past few days, he was an incredibly resilient man, absolutely not someone who would easily give up his life unless he truly suffered a great injustice. Annie had initially wanted to prove Michael was the killer, but now she had shifted her hope to clearing his name. She told her colleagues that if the woods weren't Sarah's first crime scene, then the place where she was murdered certainly wasn't too close. Otherwise, there would be no reason for the killer to go to such lengths to move the body around. The killer would have needed a vehicle to transport the body, as carrying a corpse everywhere would be too risky. She asked her colleagues to review the forensic report, but Michael's car trunk contained no blood or saliva, only a few strands of hair, not enough to prove he was the one who murdered Sarah and transported her body. The police chief brought in Michael for questioning when he had just regained consciousness and asked him when exactly he had killed Sarah. He stared at the ceiling, his eyes as empty as his heart. He had long since given up on justifying himself. He only wanted to be free. He said they were arguing. On Monday, the police provided Annie with the statement. After hearing it, she went to the school to find Michael's assistant and retrieve his work schedule. She discovered that at 4 p.m. on Wednesday, he had no scheduled appointments. This time perfectly matched the time frame of the murder he had confessed to. The police station received the information and proceeded to arrest Michael. He remained extremely negative, admitting to all the charges leveled against him by the police chief. Annie, seeing his distraught state on the surveillance screen, knocked on the interrogation room door and demanded that the police chief stop the coercion. She even argued with the police chief, leading to a heated argument between them. Annie sat down beside Michael. This time she wasn't the officer handling the case, but a friend trying to comfort him. He might not care about anyone else, but he couldn't abandon Alana, who had just lost her mother. At Annie's arrangement, the two were seated opposite each other in the interrogation room. Seeing the guilt and reluctance that Alana was trying to suppress in her eyes, Michael could no longer hold back his frustration. His emotions surged and tears streamed down his face. He said that his position as headmaster represented the image of a serious man that the school had projected to the outside world. But he had made a mistake in considering this position his entire life. When faced with family matters, such as when Sarah needed him, he was absent time and again. This caused Sarah's helplessness to gradually turn into despair. Even when he realized the crisis in his marriage, he refused to change until Sarah's infidelity, at which point he remained indifferent. He said, full of remorse, that as a husband he had let his wife down, and as a father he had let his daughter down. Alana asked if he had done it. Just then, the police received a call from Michael's assistant. She remembered that during that Wednesday's free time, she had arranged an interview for Michael at the school. This was his alibi. Finally, after discussion, the police decided to release him. Consequently, his status as a suspect was dismissed, and the case had to start all over again, gathering evidence from scratch. However, since Michael hadn't been reinstated, gathering evidence around the school still required the school's approval. The assistant informed the police that there was an upcoming football game. The vice principal had gone home to get the trophy for the awards ceremony. Annie asked for the address and rushed there. The vice principal was very cooperative, promising to let them investigate after the game was over. But as Annie went outside with him and closed the door, her eyes were drawn to the symbol on the door lock. Something in there seemed somewhat familiar. The vice principal had left for school to preside over the match. Annie seized the opportunity to return to the car and search for the key in her evidence bag. Sure enough, it matched the vice principal's door lock perfectly. She quickly returned to the door, inserted the key into the lock, and gently turned it. The door opened. Annie searched the room and found several compromising photos of the vice principal and Sarah. Just as she was concentrating on finding more evidence, he returned. He requested that if she turned off her phone, he wouldn't call for any backup. She would only speak to him as a listener. She looked at him and patiently asked if, judging from the photos, Sarah must have been incredibly special to him. Seemingly experiencing someone's understanding for the first time, the vice principal unconsciously spoke his true feelings. He had known Sarah for over 10 years and secretly loved her for over 10 years. He finally mustered the courage to confess his feelings, but Sarah flatly refused, citing her respect for her family. Unexpectedly, she developed an affair with Stephen. This plunged him into a profound sense of failure and humiliation. He stubbornly believed this was not only a retaliation for his years of unrequited love, but also a disgrace to his reputation as a teacher, a stain on the school he had worked so hard to build. Therefore, he forced Sarah to send a message to Stephen declaring an end to their relationship. Sarah, meanwhile, relentlessly yelled at him in a shrill voice. By the time he came to his senses, his once gentle hands had already tightened around Sarah's neck. Annie, while ensuring her own safety, was also planning to take the vice principal to the police station. She comforted him, saying she completely understood his feelings, that everything had happened so suddenly, it was all an accident, the police wouldn't treat him like a murderer, and that he should go to the police station to explain himself. Finally, after the police understood the whole situation, the vice principal was officially arrested. The case was finally closed, and Annie went her own way. She had learned a lesson from Michael. Avoiding problems doesn't solve anything. On the contrary, it only makes things worse. So, when her ex-husband used the investigation report from the missing person case 8 years ago as bait to get her back, she clearly stated her true feelings. It was over. The film ends here. Thank you for watching, goodbye, and see you again.